Welcome back to Inside the Philippines Journals, the channel where we sit down with the men and women who crossed the world late in life looking for something they couldn't find at home, and we let them tell you the truth about what they found out here in these islands. Some of these stories are warnings, some are love letters. Most of them, if you listen close, are a bit of both. The man you're going to hear from today is named Gaz. He's 80 years old, from Sydney, Australia. For 30 years, he was a firefighter, a man who spent his working life running into the buildings everyone else was running out of. He buried a wife. He lost most of the money he'd earned. And then, at an age when most blokes are counting out their tablets into little plastic boxes, he stood up in front of his kids and his doctor and his mates at the RSL and told them he was moving to the Philippines. To a man, they told him he was mad. They told him he was too old. They told him he'd die over there. What Gaz found out here was warmth and foolishness and a woman, and a lesson about money that cost him more than he'd like to admit. He got his fingers burnt. But whether that burn was the whole story? Well, that's why he wanted to sit down with us. Before he starts, do us a favor. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever done a mad, brave, foolish thing late in your own life, tell us that too. Somebody scrolling past needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, give this one a like, and stay with us. Here's his story, in his own words. Right, where do I start? I'm not one of your weepy ones, so don't go expecting the waterworks. I've spent my whole life around blokes who'd rather chew glass than say how they feel, and I'm one of them, so bear with me if I come at this a bit sideways. My name's Gaz, 80 years old if you can believe that, though I don't half the time. 30 years in the fire brigade, Sydney Metro, most of it out of a station in the inner west, back when the inner west was still full of factories that liked to catch fire. I've pulled people out of things you wouldn't want described to you over your dinner. I've carried a mate out over my shoulder who didn't make it, and I've stood in a burnt-out kitchen at 4 in the morning holding a kettle that survived when the family didn't. So when people started telling me, at 80, that moving to the Philippines was dangerous, that I might die over there, I've got to be honest with you, mate. It didn't land the way they wanted it to. Die. I've been on a first-name basis with dying since I was 26. It doesn't scare me. What scares me is something else. And I'll get to that. Let me tell you what scares a firefighter, since I brought it up. It's not the fire. You'd think it'd be the fire, but it isn't. The fire you can read, the fire behaves, the fire follows rules. And if you know the rules, you can walk into a room full of it and come out the other side. What scares you is the years after, the retirement, watching blokes you served with, hard men, brave men, men who'd carry 2 people down a ladder at once, watching them go home when the job finishes and just fade. Gray out, sit down in a recliner and get small and quiet, and gone long before they're actually gone. I stood at more than one funeral for a fella who'd technically died at 78, but really packed it in at 60 when he handed back the helmet. That's the fire I was frightened of. The slow one. The one with no smoke. I married my Marg in 1968. 52 years we had. She was a nurse, which is the only reason a firefighter's marriage ever works, because she understood shift work, and she understood coming home quiet. She'd take one look at me walking in the door after a bad one, and she'd not say a word. Just put the kettle on and let me sit. And after a while I'd talk or I wouldn't, and either way was all right with her. 52 years of a woman who knew when to leave you be. You don't know what you've got in that until it's a 2-bedroom unit, and there's nobody there to put the kettle on but you. We had 2 kids. Bruce, who's over in Perth doing something with mining logistics I've never fully grasped, and Janet, who's in Brisbane and worries for a living. Good kids. I'm not going to sit here and slag my own kids, but grown and gone and busy the way they are. Marg went 2 years before I left. Cancer, the slow kind, the kind that makes you a nurse yourself for the last stretch of it. I did her medications and her sponge baths, and I held her hand at the end. And when she was gone, I went home to a 2-bedroom unit in Merrickville that had never once in 52 years been silent. And it was silent. That's the thing nobody tells you about a long marriage ending. It's not the big sad moments. It's the kettle. You boil a kettle for one, and you stand there in the quiet listening to it, and you think, is this it now? Is this the rest of it? And I'll tell you the other thing that had gone wrong, because it matters to the story and I'm not too proud to say it. The money. I'd done 30 years. I had a super balance. One should have been a comfortable old man. But about 8 years back, a mate's son talked me into what he called a sure thing. A storage unit syndicate. Self-storage. People always need somewhere to put their junk, Gaz. It can't lose. I put in the bulk of my nest egg. 200,000, near enough. And it lost. The whole structure of it was rotten. The fella running it was a crook. And it went down the gurgler and took my comfortable old age with it. I came out the far end of that with the age pension and about $50,000 to my name, and a very expensive lesson about the words can't lose, which I clearly did not learn because, well, you'll see, I'm a slow learner, 80 years old and still finding new ways to be a mug. So, there I was, widowed, skint, rattling around a silent unit in Merrickville, eating my tea over the sink like an animal. And I want you to understand, it wasn't the sadness that got me. Firefighters are good at sad. It was the smallness. The pension covered the rates and the power and my food, and not $1 more. My whole world had shrunk to the distance between the couch and the fridge. I'd go down the RSL on a Thursday and sit with the last 3 blokes still alive from my station, and we'd nurse a schooner each and complain about our knees, and I'd look at us and think, this is the waiting room. That's all this is. We're just sitting in the waiting room being polite about it. Now, how the Philippines got into my head. It was a fella off the internet, if you must know. I'd got onto these expat forums late at night. That's what the lonely do. They get onto forums. And there were all these blokes my age, older even, living over there on a pension like mine and living like kings. Warm all year. A community. People who said good morning to you in the street. And a bloke I got chatting with, an Aussie down near Cebu, said to me, "Mate, over here your pension's a fortune. You'll never be cold, and you'll never be alone unless you want to be." And something in that second bit went into me like a hook. I sat on that idea for months, mind. I want you to know I wasn't rash about it. I read everything. I watched the videos, including, I'll be honest, a fair few on channels not unlike this one, blokes telling their sad tales, getting fleeced, ending up broke and bitter in a bar in Angeles City, warning everyone off. I saw all the warnings. I want that on the record, because when it all went the way it went, I couldn't turn round and say, nobody told me. Everybody told me. The internet is wall-to-wall with old men telling you exactly what happened to me before it happened to me. I watched it all, and I thought, well, that won't be me, because I'm not a fool, which is, of course, precisely the thought every one of those fellas had, sitting where I was sitting, before they were the fool. There ought to be a warning about the warnings. I told the kids over a Sunday roast at Janet's. I said, I'm going to go and have a look at the Philippines, and if I like it I might stay. You'd have thought I'd said I was joining a cult. Janet cried, actual tears into the gravy, and said, "What would Mum think?" which is a low blow, and she knew it. Bruce got on the phone from Perth and used the word predatory about 11 times, and said, "Did I know the statistics?" And I said, "No, Bruce, tell me the statistics." And he couldn't, but he was sure there were some. My doctor, when I told him, actually laughed, and said, "Gaz, at your age, the flight alone." Charged me $60 for the appointment, and laughed at me in it. The blokes at the RSL just shook their heads into their beers, which is the RSL way of burying you before you're dead. Old Kenny, who's on oxygen and hasn't left his daughter's house in 3 years, except to come to the club, told me I was mad to give up my life in Sydney. My life in Sydney. I looked at Kenny with his little tank on its trolley, and I thought, mate, which one of us hasn't got a life to give up here? And every single one of them said some version of the same thing. You're too old. You're too old, Gaz. It's too late for that sort of caper. Sit tight. Be sensible. Wait it out. Too old. I sat in that quiet unit that night with the kettle ticking as it cooled, and I thought about the word. Too old for what? For living? I'd spent 30 years watching people's houses and lives burn down with no warning at all. Watched how fast it all goes. And here were all these people telling an 80-year-old widower to be careful, to be sensible, to wait. Wait for what? There's only one thing left at the end of the waiting, and I've seen plenty of it already. So I booked the ticket. One way. Silly old bugger. Off to the tropics at 80. And I've got to tell you, sitting on that plane, terrified, thrilled, my heart going like a young man's, it was the most alive I'd felt since before Marg got sick. That was the bit they were all wrong about. I just didn't yet know the bit they were right about. The heat hits you first. They open the aircraft door in Cebu, and it comes in like you've opened an oven to check the roast. Thick, wet, smelling of jet fuel, and something green and sweet underneath it. I stood at the top of those stairs, 80 years old, sweating through my good shirt, grinning like an idiot. Marg would have hated it. She was a cold shower, open all the windows woman. I loved it on sight. I'd booked a little place in Mabalo, in Cebu City, through the Aussie fella off the forum. A 1-bedroom with a fan and an air-con that worked when it felt like it, up above a sari-sari store where the family sold soft drinks and single cigarettes and sachets of shampoo through a little barred window. First morning, the roosters started at 4. Then the karaoke started somewhere down the lane, someone murdering a Whitney Houston number at a volume that should be illegal. Then the church bells. Then a bloke selling bread out of a basket on a bicycle singing Pan de Sal up the street. By 6 in the morning, I'd heard more life than I'd heard in 2 years in Marrickville. I lay there under that ceiling fan laughing to myself. Too old. Right. Everything cost nothing. Or that's how it felt at first coming from Sydney. A proper feed at a Mang Inasal, grilled chicken, a mound of rice, the unlimited rice they do, and the little bowl of soup. A couple of 100 pesos, call it 7 or 8 of my dollars. A big brown bottle of Red Horse at the sari-sari, 40 pesos, near enough $1. I'd get a tricycle across half the city for the price of a servo pie. My pension, which in Sydney had me eating over the sink, over here made me feel like I'd robbed a bank. The Aussie fella wasn't wrong about that part. The first few weeks I was on my own, and I want to be straight that I was happy in them, genuinely, before Rosa was ever on the scene, because it matters to what came after. I'd get up with the roosters and walk down to a little bakery for pandesal still warm, and sit with a 3-in-1 coffee watching the street wake up. The kids in their spotless white school shirts, the mothers, the vendors setting up, the whole racket of it. I walked, At 80, mind, with my knees. But I walked down Colin Street, which they'll tell you is the oldest street in the whole country, past the stalls selling everything under God's sun, DVDs and phone cases and dried fish and shoes. I got lost on purpose and found my way back. I ate at the Larsian barbecue of an evening, pointing at skewers of chicken and pork belly and those little intestines they do, and a young bloke at the next bench showed me how to eat them with the puso, the rice hung up in little woven pouches, and laughed his head off at how badly I managed it, and bought me a beer for the entertainment. Nobody in Sydney had bought me a beer for being entertaining in a long, long time. And people talk to you. That's the thing. Back home, an old man in a shopping center is a piece of the furniture. People look through you, past you, like you've already half gone. Here, the young ones at SM City Cebu would call me Sir and Tito and want to know where I was from. And the old fellas playing chess by the Fuente Osmeña roundabout waved me over to watch. And the tricycle drivers learned my name and my street. There was a girl at the pharmacy counter at the Mercury Drug who remembered my blood pressure tablets and had them ready when she saw me coming, and I know that's her job. But nobody in Sydney had done my job that well for me in years. I wasn't invisible. After 2 years of being furniture, being seen again was like coming up out of cold water into the sun. I'm telling you all this so you understand what state I was in when Rosa came along. Because a smarter, colder man, a younger man, might have kept his guard up. But I wasn't cold. I'd been starving for a bit of warmth for 2 years, and I'd just been handed a whole country of it. And my defenses, whatever a firefighter's defenses are, were down around my ankles. That's not an excuse. I'm 80. I don't need excuses. I'll take the blame for my own foolishness, thank you very much. It's just the truth of it. I met her on the internet, same as I'd met the country. There's a dating site, one of the big Filipino ones, and I'd made a profile more as a joke than anything. An 80-year-old firefighter. What am I selling? I'd put an honest photo up, all my own gray hair and my own bad knees, and written something daft like, "Retired Sydney firefighter, widower, can still cook a decent snag, looking for a friend." I didn't expect a bar of it. Blokes on the forum reckoned the young ones would swamp you and it was all a racket. And I thought, well, I'm a curiosity at best. Rosa messaged me first. Rosalind, but everyone called her Rosa. She was, and here's where you're going to shake your head at me. And go on, you are allowed. She was 41. Yes, I know, 39 years. I heard it too, mate, I'm not deaf. But I want to explain what it actually felt like, because from the inside, it did not feel like the sad old cliché it looks like from the outside. She didn't come on strong. That was the thing that disarmed me. She wasn't all lovey and gushing like the forum blokes warned about. She was funny, dry even, teased me about being ancient, called me Lolo Gaz, which means grandfather, and I liked that she took the mickey out of it instead of pretending it wasn't there. She was from Toledo City, over the other side of Cebu Island, working as a cashier in the city and sending money back to her mum and a younger sister. She had a kid, a boy of 9, living with her mother in Toledo. A separated woman. I'll come back to that word later, because it did more work in this story than I understood at the time. We messaged for a couple of weeks, then we did video calls, every night, near enough. And she always did this thing, the first thing before anything else. Gaz, did you eat na? Have you eaten? Every single time. Kumain ka na ba? I didn't know then that it's just a thing they say, that it's how a Filipina says she cares about you, that half the country is asking the other half if they've eaten. To me, it landed like being tucked in. Nobody had asked me if I'd eaten since Marg. And here was this warm, funny woman on the far side of an island asking me every night like it mattered. And she remembered things. That got me more than anything. I'd mention on a Tuesday that my left knee was the crook one, and on the Friday she'd ask, "How's the bad knee, the left one?" I'd told her about Marg being a nurse, and she never trod on it, never got jealous of a dead woman the way I hear some do. She'd ask about her, gentle, what was she like, and listen. For a man who'd spent 2 years with nobody to tell the small things to, having somebody hold the small things, the knee, the wife, the way I take my coffee, was a kind of drug. And I was on it before I knew there was a needle in my arm. We met in person after about a month. She came into the city on the bus, 3 hours each way from Toledo, and she paid her own fare and wouldn't hear otherwise, and we met at the Ayala Center by the fountains, and she was smaller than I'd pictured, and she laughed with her whole face, and she took my old arm, walking through the mall like it was the most natural thing in the world. We had halo at a place in the food court, this mad dessert, shaved ice and beans and jelly and ice cream all in together, looks like a bin accident, tastes like heaven, and she laughed at me trying to work out how to eat it. I hadn't laughed at a table with a woman in 2 years. I want you to sit with that for a second before you judge the old fool, because that's the whole engine of it right there. It wasn't lust. God help me. At 80, it's not lust running the show. It's the empty chair across the table. It's being asked if you've eaten. That's what they get you with, if "get you" is even the right way to say it. I'm still not sure it is. For the first while, she never asked me for a thing. I want that on the record, because it's important, and because it's exactly what made me trust the rest. No sob stories, no emergencies. She paid her own bus fare and got shirty when I tried to pay it for her. And that, more than any amount of gushing, is what walked me straight in the front door. The money started small, and it started with me, not her. That's the part one've had to be honest with myself about. She didn't con it out of me at first. I offered. It was the boy. Her son, Jomar, 9 years old, over in Toledo with her mum. School was starting, and I could hear the worry in her voice one night on the video call. Not asking, just worried. The school shoes, and the uniform, and the notebooks, and the little fees they nickel and dime you for. And I thought, I've got $50,000 sitting in a Sydney bank doing nothing, and my pension over here is more than I can spend, and this good woman is fretting over a pair of school shoes. So I said, let me help with the boys' school. She said, no, Gaz, I can't. Went back and forth. Eventually, she let me send 3,000 pesos through the Gcash, about 80 of my dollars. $80. To make a woman I was fond of stop worrying about a 9-year-old's shoes. Tell me you wouldn't have. At 80, with money you're not using, tell me you'd have said no. And the thank you I got. The photos of the boy in his little uniform, the relief in her face on the call that night. $80 had never bought me anything like it in my life. That's the hook, not the asking, the buying. You find out you can lift a weight off someone you care about for the price of a night out in Sydney. And you want to do it again. It's the most natural thing in the world, and it's the top of a very long slide. From there, it just settled into a shape. I didn't decide it. It accreted, the way soot builds up in a flue, a little at a time until one day the whole thing's lined with it. Within a couple of months, I was sending her a regular allowance. 25,000 pesos a month, about 700 of my dollars. We never sat down and agreed it. It just became the thing that happened. The first week of the month, Gcash to Rosa, and out of it came Jamar's school and her mum's blood pressure tablets and the rice and the rest. And I need you to understand how reasonable it looked from where I sat, because this is how they all get us. And by they, I mean our own good intentions as much as anyone. $700 a month. In Sydney, that's nothing. That's not even a decent week. Over here, it was transforming a whole family. And I could see it transforming them. And I had it to give. I wasn't going without. I felt, for the first time since Marg, useful. A provider again. You spend 30 years being the bloke who turns up when it's all going wrong and helps. That's what a firefighter is. And then you retire, and nobody needs you for anything. And then suddenly, here's a whole family who lights up when your name comes on the phone. I'm not going to pretend that felt bad. It felt bloody marvelous. That was the trap, and the bait in it was my own better nature, and I walked in whistling. I met the family after about 3 months, went over to Toledo on the bus with a sack of pasalubong. That's the gifts you're expected to bring, and I brought a beauty. Tinned goods and bread and toys for the boy, and a bottle of Tandway rum for the uncle. And they were lovely to me. That's the thing I can't let myself forget when I want to make it all a con. The mother cooked all day, a proper Cebu feast, lechon they'd chipped in for, the crispy pork, and pancit, and the lot, and they sat me in the good chair, and the boy showed me his school things, and the neighbors came to have a look at Rosa's cano. I sat in that little concrete house, with the chooks going in the yard, and a fan pushing the hot air around, and I felt like I'd been let into something. A family. After 2 years of the kettle. You'd have to be made of stone. There's a word they've got over there. Utang na loob. It means a debt of gratitude, a debt you carry in your inside, and it runs deep in the culture, deeper than we've got a word for. And I felt it working on me, though I couldn't have named it then. They'd fed me, taken me in, made me family, and now I owed. And the way you pay is you provide. It's not sinister. It's genuinely how the whole society holds together. Family looking after family, and the eldest earner carries the rest. The trouble is, when the eldest earner is a lonely old firefighter with a Sydney bank account. Because then, the pot you're expected to carry is bottomless. And every bit of it feels like love, because a lot of it genuinely is. The asks proper started after that visit, and each one, on its own, I could look at and go, well, of course you help. The mother had a turn. High blood pressure, ended up in a hospital in Cebu for 3 days, and the bill came to 60,000 pesos, a bit over 1,600 of my dollars. And what was I going to do? Let Rosa's mother go without? I paid it. Barely thought about it. That's the thing. I'd stopped thinking about it. The soot was lining the flue. I keep coming back to that first $80 and the boy's shoes, because I've worked out that's where I lost the ability to say no. Once you've felt what it feels like to lift the weight, saying no feels like putting the weight back on. And they knew, she knew, the family knew, that the old Kano couldn't stand to put the weight back on. Whether they knew it cold and worked it, or whether they just felt it the way you feel weather coming, I still can't tell you. Probably both. People are mostly both. By about the 4th or 5th month, I'd stopped keeping any kind of tally, which for a man who lost 200 grand to a sure thing, you'd think would be branded on my brain. But love, or whatever you want to call an 80-year-old's version of it, is very good at not doing the sums. I did them later. Oh, I did them later, all right. The Sari Sari store was Rosa's idea, and I'll give her this. It was a good one, or it sounded like one. She was tired of being a cashier, tired of the bus, and she wanted something of her own, and a little Sari Sari store, one of those front window shops selling the sachets and the soft drinks and the loose smokes, is the classic way a Filipina gets a bit of independence. She wanted 80,000 pesos to stock it up and fix the front of her mom's place to run it out of. A bit over 2,000 of my dollars. And I thought, now this is different. This is the good kind. This isn't me handing over money. This is me setting her up so she doesn't need handing money. This gets her off the allowance. This is an investment in her standing on her own feet. And won't that be better for both of us? I actually felt clever about it. 80 years old, and I'd learned nothing from the storage units. I heard the words, "She won't need the allowance anymore," and I reached for my wallet exactly the way I had when I heard, "It can't lose." The store opened. There were photos. Her behind the little counter looking proud, the boy helping. And do you know, the allowance did not stop. Somehow the store never quite made money. There was always a reason. A slow month. A competitor down the lane. Stock that spoiled. And the 700 a month kept going out just the same. Plus, now the odd top-up for the store. I didn't see it clearly at the time. Each thing had its own good reason. It's only when you lay them end to end that they make a shape, and the shape is a bloke being bled slow and gentle so he never flinches. Then it was the sister. Rosa's younger sister, Michelle, was clever. Everyone said so, and there was a chance for her to do a proper college course in the city, a nursing assistant thing, and it was 45,000 pesos for the semester, about 1,200 of my dollars. And Rosa cried on the call about it, real tears, about how their family never got chances like this, and here was one, and they couldn't reach it. And Marg had been a nurse. That's the thing that did me in on that one. I heard nursing, and I saw my Marg, and I thought, if I can put one girl from a concrete house in Toledo into a nursing uniform, that's a thing worth doing with a dead firefighter's money. So I paid the semester, then the next one. Then Christmas came, and if you've never done a Filipino Christmas, you don't know what you're in for, money-wise. It starts in September over there. The minute a month ends in Bear, the carols come on in the malls. And it runs for months, and every bit of it costs. There was the Noche Buena, the big midnight feed, and the pasalubong for every cousin and godchild, and the gifts for the boy, and a new dress for Rosa for the fiesta because she couldn't be seen in last year's, and the family's town fiesta itself, which is a matter of honor, where the family that hosts must feed half the barangay or lose face forever. All told, that season cost me the better part of another 60,000 pesos on top of everything, $1,600, dribbled out in 100 little gas, just one more thing messages, and I paid every one of them with a Merry Christmas and a heart like a mug's heart, glad to be part of a Christmas that had people in it at all. I bought her a phone in there too. A good one, 30,000 pesos, because her old one had a cracked screen, and I couldn't stand the thought of her squinting at me through the cracks on our nightly call. $800 for a phone. I laugh now. I bought the very phone she'd tilt away from me. I bought the instrument of my own education and gift-wrapped it. Then it was the brother. There's always more family. That's the other thing. The family is a well with no bottom. The brother needed a motorbike to run a habal-habal, the motorbike taxi game, to earn. 70,000 pesos, close to $1,900. A man's got to be able to earn, hasn't he? I paid. Then a typhoon came through and took half the roof off the mother's place, and the roof was 120,000 pesos to do properly. About $3,200. And you can't leave an old woman and a child under a tarp in the wet season, can you? I paid. And in between all the big ones, there was the constant small drip. The fiesta they had to host and couldn't lose face over. The boy's birthday, the pasalubong every time I visited. A cousin's this, a neighbor's that. 3,000 here on the Gcash, 5,000 there. I never counted it. I want to be honest. I chose not to count it. Some animal part of me knew that if I counted it, I'd have to look at it. And I did not want to look at it. Because looking at it meant looking at whether the thing I'd flown across the world for was real. I did try to talk to Bruce about it once, on the phone, early on, when the money was starting to add up and some sober part of me wanted a second opinion. And I couldn't do it. I got as far as, I've been helping Rosa's family a bit, and I heard him go quiet and careful down the line, and I knew if I told him the real numbers, he'd have been on the next flight to drag me home. And, this is the mad part, one didn't want to be dragged home. I wanted the thing more than I wanted to be saved from it. So I lied to my own son to protect the very situation that was robbing me. That's how these things stay alive. Not because the woman's clever, because you help her hide it. Even from the people who love you. Because, on some level, you'd rather be robbed and warm than safe and alone. Chew on that one. I have. Because here's what I'd started to notice. In the quiet, the way you notice a smell of gas before you can find the leak. She'd gone cagey with the phone. Rosa, who used to video call me every night and ask had I eaten, had got harder to reach of an evening. Whole nights she'd not answer. Then next day it was her mother was sick, or the signal was bad in Toledo, or the phone was low. When we were together and a message came in, she'd tilt the screen away from me, casual. A little turn of the wrist I only clocked because I'd started, God help me, to look for it. Once I heard a man's voice in the background of a call, deep, laughing, close, and she said, quick, it was the neighbor fixing the fan. And I said, right-o, and I let it go. I let it all go. That's the confession, really. 30 years I'd trained myself to walk toward the thing everyone else runs from. To go into the smoke and find the seat of the fire. And here in my own life I could smell smoke in every room, and I kept walking the other way, out into the fresh air, telling myself it was nothing. Because I did not want to find the fire. I wanted the warm house. I'd been cold so long. The thing that finally made me strike a match and look was the house. Rosa wanted us to build a house. A proper one, concrete, 2 stories, on a bit of family land in Toledo. A house for her and the boy and her mother. And for me, she said, a place for Lolo Gaz to grow old in the sun instead of that rented box in Mabolo. And when she talked about it, her whole face went soft, in a way I hadn't seen since the early days. And I'll be straight with you. Part of me wanted it so bad. My teeth ached. A home. A family home. With my name spoken warm inside it, at the end of a life where I'd ended up alone in a silent unit. That was the dream I'd got on the plane for. She was holding it out to me in both hands. 2 million pesos, the build. About 54,000 of my dollars. Which, and here's the arithmetic that finally got through, was very nearly every dollar I had left in the world. I'd come over with 50,000, and I'd been bleeding it, and the pension both for over a year. And the 50 was down under 30. And this house would take all of that, and then some. It would be the storage units all over again, except this time I wouldn't even own it, because a foreigner can't own land in the Philippines. Can't. It's the law. So the land would be in her name, and the house on it would be in her name, and I would be an old man who'd handed over his last cent for a house he had no more claim to than the bloke selling Pandesal off the bike. And even then, even seeing all that, I nearly did it. That's how far gone I was. I sat there with the calculator on my phone and the whole rotten sum laid out plain, and I thought, well, but it's Rosa. It's different. Some sober little firefighter still alive in the back of my skull was screaming at me the way you scream at a bloke about to open the wrong door, the one with the fire behind it. And I very nearly opened it anyway. What stopped me wasn't wisdom. I wish I could tell you it was wisdom. It was a row. It was a stupid, ordinary row about the phone. And it was her own mouth that finally told me the truth, in anger, because I never had the sense to find it out for myself. Here's how it happened. I'd gone over to Toledo to talk about the house, all keen, the proud old fool with his calculator. And while we were sitting there, her phone kept going and going, and she kept doing the wrist turn, tilting it away, thumbing out quick replies, and something in me that had been swallowing it for months just wouldn't swallow it this time. I asked her, easy enough at first, "Who's that then?" She said, "A cousin." It went again. I said, "That's a busy cousin." She got sharp. I got sharp back. And I said the thing I'd been not saying for the better part of a year. I said, "Rosa, is there someone else? Is there a fella?" And she laughed at me. Not cruel, exactly. Worse than cruel. Tired. Like I was a child asking a question too stupid to bother with. And she was hurt, and cornered and tired, and the row had got its claws in. And out it came, the whole of it, in a rush, in Bisaya, and English tumbled together. And the part one understood, the part that went into me and stuck, was this. You think you are the only one? You think a woman like me lives on one old man? There are others, Gaz. Of course there are others. How do you think we survive? Others. I sat in that little concrete house with the chooks going in the yard and the fan pushing the hot air around, and the whole thing turned over in front of me like a truck going slow onto its side. Unstoppable. Everything spilling out. There were others. I got it out of her, in pieces over that awful hour. I couldn't stop. Once the door was open, I had to see the whole room. There was an American, older even than me, in Florida, who she'd never met in the flesh, sending money every month. There was a German, younger, who came over twice a year. There'd been others come and gone, each of us with our own Rosa, our own nightly "Have you eaten?" Our own boys' school shoes, our own sad, hopeful old face on the video call thinking he was the one warming her whole life. I wasn't her partner. I was a line item. I was the Australian. Somewhere in a ledger in that woman's head, next to the American and the German, there was an entry that said, Gaz, 25K monthly, plus extras, wants to build. And I was the plus extras wants to build. And the wants to build was about to be my last $30,000. And here's the part 1,000 not proud of, and the part that maybe saved me. I laughed. I sat there, 80 years old, gut-punched, and I laughed, this awful dry bark of a laugh, because the firefighter in me had finally been shown the seat of the fire, and it was so much bigger than I'd let myself imagine, and there was a kind of terrible relief in just seeing it at last. The whole warm house was smoke. Had been for a year. And I'd nearly handed over the last of everything to a building that was already alight. She saw the calculator still sitting there on the table between us, the 2 million peso sum still glowing on it. And I watched her watch it. And I watched her understand, in the same second I did, that the house was dead, that the Australian had finally worked it out. And do you know what got me? She didn't rage, she didn't beg, she just went sort of flat and far away. And she said, "Quiet. I have a family to feed, Gaz." And the terrible thing is, that was true. That was the truest thing she'd said all year. She did have a family to feed. I'd seen them. I'd eaten their lechon. That was never the lie. The lie was that I was anything more than one of the taps she'd learned to turn. I didn't do the big scene. 1,000 too old for scenes, and I'd had a lifetime of other people's emergencies. I picked up my phone, and I turned the calculator off. I remember that, actually turning it off, like turning off a gas ring, and I said, "Righto, Rosa, righto." And I got the bus back to the city. I did the sums on that bus. First time I'd done them all the way through, and I made myself do it properly. The firefighter's incident report, cause and cost, no flinching. The monthly allowance, near enough a year and a half of it. The mother's hospital. The store that never earned. The sister's schooling, 2 semesters of it. The brother's motorbike. The roof after the typhoon. The Christmas that ate a month's pension on its own. The phone, the bloody phone. All the little 3 and 5 thousands on the G-cash that I'd chosen not to see. Laid end to end, it came to the far side of 900,000 pesos. In my money, call it $25,000. 25,000 of a dead firefighter's last 50. On a bus in Cebu, going slow past the sari-sari stores and the basketball courts in the dusk, I added up what my loneliness had cost me, and it came to $25,000. And I'll tell you the strange thing. What I felt, sitting on that bus, was not what I'd have expected. It wasn't heartbreak, not mostly. It was relief, because I'd caught it. 30,000 still in the bank, the house money still mine. The last of it saved by the one row I finally didn't back down from. My mate Bruce's word, predatory, was ringing in my ears from all those Sundays ago in Brisbane. And he'd been right, hadn't he? Right enough. And so had the RSL blokes and the whole chorus of them. Except they'd been right about the wrong thing. That's what I worked out on the bus, and it's the thing I most want to say to you, so lean in. They said I was too old to go, too old to want, too old to live. And they were wrong about that, dead wrong, completely wrong. What they were right about was smaller. They were right that a lonely old man with money is a mark. That's true anywhere, in Cebu, in Marrickville, at the RSL. Anywhere there's a lonely old man and a bit of money, there'll be someone reading the loneliness. It's got nothing to do with the Philippines and nothing to do with being too old. It's to do with being lonely, and I'd have been just as easy a mark for a smooth-talking financial advisor in Sydney. Was, in fact, already the storage units. Same wound, different bandage. The country didn't do it to me. My own hunger did it to me. And my hunger flew over on the plane with me in the seat next to mine. I'll tell you who set me straight, in the weeks after. It was the other old expats. The real ones, not the forum, the flesh and blood ones I'd been half avoiding because I thought I was different from them. Better, not one of the sad cases. There's a little canteen near me does a decent breakfast, and a few of us washed-up old canos take it of a morning. And when the Rosa business came out, I finally told them, expecting a roasting. And not one of them roasted me. Every single one had his own version. There was a Canadian, Denny, lost a good deal more than me to a girl in Davao, and stayed anyway. There was an Englishman, Brian, done it twice, if you can believe that, and laughed about it, said the second one was school fees. and an old German fella who just put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Ja, Gaz, the first year is expensive for everyone." That was the whole eulogy for my $25,000. The first year is expensive for everyone. And somehow it did me more good than all Bruce's statistics, because these were men who'd been burnt, and hadn't gone bitter, and hadn't gone home, and were sitting there in the sun laughing over a plate of eggs at 82, and I thought, that's the club I want, not the RSL and the oxygen tanks. This one. I stayed. That surprised everyone, including me. When the whole business with Rosa came apart, the kids were sure I'd come limping home to Sydney with my tail between my legs, and there was a version of me that thought so too. Bruce all but had the spare room made up, in a tone of voice that said, "I told you so," without ever quite saying it. And I sat in my little place in Mabolo, with the fan going and the roosters and the karaoke and the bloke singing Pandasal up the lane, and I thought about it hard, going back. Back to the unit in Merrickville, back to the kettle and the quiet and the waiting room down the RSL, back to being furniture. And I couldn't. God help me, even after all of it, I couldn't. Because I'd rather have my fingers burnt over here in the warmth than be safe and gray and slowly disappearing back there. That's not me being romantic about it. That's a clear-eyed choice from a man who's done the sums. Over here, even skint, even the fool, I'm alive. The chess fellas by the Fuente still wave me over. The family at the Sari downstairs sends the little one up with a plate when they cook something special. I've made mates, real ones, a couple of other old expats, who've each got their own version of my story, and we don't lie to each other about it, which is more than I can say for the RSL. I get my pension, I live well on it, I've got around $25,000 still behind me, for whatever the end throws up, and I sit on my little balcony in the evening with a cold red horse and watch the whole loud living street go by, and I think, they told me I was too old for this. Too old. I've never felt less old in my life. Now don't mistake me. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I did it right. I did it wrong. I did nearly all of it wrong. I sent money I should have kept. I ignored smoke I should have followed. I let a good woman in a hard place read my loneliness like a shop-front sign, and I very nearly gave away my last dollar for a house on land I could never own. If you're getting on a plane to do what I did, learn from the mug. Keep your money in your own name and your own country. Don't send a peso in the first year, no matter how good the reason, and know that "have you eaten" is love and business both, and you'll not always get to tell which is which. Meet the family, sure, but count your money while you do it. A foreigner can't own the land, so don't build on it. And the biggest one, the one that's got nothing to do with the Philippines, sort out the hole in yourself before you go looking for someone to fill it, because you'll take that hole with you anywhere on earth, and there's always, always someone who'll offer to fill it for a monthly fee. Do I hate her? No. I want to say that plain, because I can hear you waiting for it. I don't hate Rosa. I did for a week or two, in the worst of it. But I've seen too much of how the world actually works to hate a woman for feeding her kid off the loneliness of rich old men, when rich old men keep flying over and offering it up. She did a cold thing and a hurtful thing, and I was a fool to her, all that's true. And she also, I reckon, in some corner of it, did once actually wonder if the old bloke had eaten. People are both. Poor and frightened people are especially both. I paid $25,000 to learn that a person can be using you and half-meaning it at the same time, and that the half-meaning it doesn't get you your money back, and the using you doesn't cancel the half that was real. I'd have paid more to learn it, honestly. Cheaper than the storage units, and I got a suntan. That's about all I've got. 80 years old, out here in the heat, lighter in the wallet, and I'm going to use the word and you can laugh. Happier than I've been since before Marg got sick. They said I was too old and they were wrong. And they said, be careful, and they were right. And both those things can sit in the one old man at the one time, same as everything else in this story. I got my fingers burnt. Good. It means I still had them in the fire. Silly old bugger, and glad of it. And that's where Gaz leaves it. And I don't know that I've heard it put much better on this channel. He came out here at 80 and got most of what they warned him about. And he'd do it again tomorrow. And I believe him. Because the thing they were all right about, the money and the mark, that was real. And he owns it. But the thing they were all wrong about was bigger. They told a grieving, brave old man that his living was behind him, that the sensible thing was to sit down in the quiet and wait. And he looked at that, and he said no. And burnt or not, $25,000 lighter or not, look at where he's sitting tonight, with his cold beer and his loud street, and his own 2 feet still under him. There's no villain in this one, not really. There's a lonely man who needed to be needed so badly he stopped counting, and there's a poor woman feeding a family, the only way the world left open to her, doing a hard and dishonest thing out of desperation and not out of evil. Family obligation out here is real, and it is crushing, and it turns decent people into people who read your wallet, and none of that is the same as wickedness. Poverty is not wickedness. Loneliness is not weakness. And being 80, whatever your kids and your doctor and the blokes at the club tell you, is not the same as being finished. So, wherever you're watching from tonight, be a little kinder to the lonely old blokes in your life. Ring your dad, ring your granddad, ask him, has he eaten? Because the whole Gaz carried onto that plane is a lot of good people are carrying right now in the quiet. And it doesn't have to cost them $25,000 to find out they're not alone. Leave us a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever done a mad, brave, foolish thing to feel alive again, tell us that too. Somebody down there needs it. Take care of yourselves out there. This has been Inside the Philippines Journals, and we'll see you on the next one. The